Okay, folks, hello again. Welcome to today's webinar on mHealth and the mobile security implications around mHealth. My name is Krishna Vishnu Butler. Um, I am a VP in the product organization in Zimperium. I will be your host for this webinar along with Zach. Zach, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing, Krishna. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank all the Health ISAC members to take time out of their busy day and be a part of this webinar, which I think you're going to get a lot of value out of. My purpose here is to be the voice of the members, so I'd encourage you, if you see that question mark over there to the right hand of your screen, to go ahead and put your questions in there, and we will ensure that your questions get answered by the panel. Again, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it back over to Krishna for introductions, agenda, and to welcome everybody else.
Thanks, Zach, and welcome to all the HISAC members. Thank you for taking the time. Let me introduce our speakers today. We have Chris Ackroyd, who's the SVP CIO of Children's Health. Chris, thank you for being here.
Krishna, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And then we have Vince Nugent, who's a Senior Program Manager within the Diabetes Division of Medtronic. Hey, Vince.
Hi, Krishna. Thank you for the great introduction.
No problem. And then we have Zimperium's own Monique Vicente joining me in the webinar. Hey, Monique, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Really excited to be here.
Perfect. So, folks, just on the agenda, we have about a little over 45 minutes. And here's what we're going to cover, right? We'll spend majority of the time kind of having a panel discussion with Chris and Vince around, what they see within their organizations. There are a set of questions that we'll walk them through and get their take on it. Once we do that, we'll talk about some mHealth security use cases, things that we are seeing that are growing rapidly within the industry, and some recommendations, right? Just some lessons learned based on our own research and what customers are telling us about this field and what they are worried about when it comes to security. Best practice and recommendations. Last, we will spend a few minutes on what we feel you need to think about, right? On what are the elements within mobile security that you should keep in mind as you embark on your security journey. And obviously, we'll get Chris and Vince to chime in and to see what their experience was. So before we dive into the panel, just a few housekeeping items. As you hear the conversation between all of us, if they are questions, please do put them in the Q&A part of the BrightTalk platform. We will address questions at the end just so that it gives us enough time to get through all the content and spend as much time with Vince and Chris as possible. If there are some questions in there we can't answer right away in this session, I promise we will get back to you. So please do leave any contact information if this is something you want to have a deeper discussion on. Leave some more information so that we can reach out to you along with the question. All right. So let's get into the panel discussion, right? So the format of this discussion is really going to be a set of questions that I will lead with and then let Chris and Vince provide their feedback and knowledge around the topic. But before we do that, Chris, why don't you go ahead and give us a little information about the organization you work for?
Absolutely. So as Krishna mentioned, I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Children's Health, which is we are a Dallas-based pediatric hospital facility. We have two locations within the DFW region, Dallas proper and our northern market we refer to as Plano, or it's Plano we refer to as our northern market. But we are one of the largest pediatric facilities in the nation. We are a high-level tertiary quaternary care facility with over 55 specialties and subspecialties in our organization. So great reputation, great organization, taking care of the kids in the North Texas region.
It's amazing. Chris. Vince, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your organization.
So Medtronic is a global medical device manufacturer. We've got several different operating units, about 14 of them. The operating unit that I belong to is very specifically diabetes. So we concentrate on diabetes therapy. That includes insulin pumps, insulin glucose monitoring, and the entire ecosystem that goes with it. So lots of awesome stuff happening, specifically with the digital transformation and the cloud and information. So we work with the entire ecosystem of sensor data to cloud to the healthcare provider to give them that information in order to try to treat or provide therapy to the patients themselves. So a total force multiplier when it comes to data and the speed of data and not being checked once every 3 months with your healthcare provider. You'll get a lot more continuous updates.
Yeah, and it's amazing. That's why it's so nice to have both of you on, because even we were at Gartner a few weeks ago, and so much of the talk is starting to go around wearables, right? Whether it's bio-wearables or any form of wearables that, satisfy the need of continuous monitoring, symptom tracking. How do we track patients outside of the hospital, right? And how to optimize the costs around that. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, because I think the two areas that both of you are in seem to be heavily embracing tech, right? Whether it's tele or wearables, it's just incredible what it'll be able to do. All right, so the first question, where and how are you using mobile apps or devices? Chris, why don't you lead this, and then we'll go to Vince.
Okay. Christian, I think as you mentioned, we're using mobile apps throughout the organization. Starting, I guess, internally with our own employees and caregivers. Mobility really is shaping the workflow of our nurses and even our physicians on how we treat at the bedside. So all of our nursing staff carry a Android mobile device that has a number of tools on it. And for the past couple of years, the goal has been to kind of reduce the number of devices on their tool belt, as it were. Back in the day, it was pager along with a Wi-Fi phone with a bunch of other things pushing a cart around. Well, it's all condensed now to a mobile phone. Same with our physician population, as we start to really push towards pager replacements and getting secure messaging flowing between caregivers and nurses and the whole care team. And then, I don't want to steal anything from Vince, but we're a customer of a lot of his products, and I think we've got a responsibility too, as we ingest a lot of vendor products and we start pushing out to our consumer community of, is it a solid product? So how do we do risk assessments and manage that of the products that we're pushing in, asking our consumers to now put on their devices and engage with us when it comes to wearable devices.
Yeah. Vince, how about your organization? I mean, this is a fun space for you guys.
Yeah. Our organization, same thing. As far as internal, I'm not going to talk too much about that, but totally embrace the mobile and the whole mobility of being able to be in touch with everyone. But more on this topic, we're a manufacturer, so we manufacture insulin pumps and glucose sensors. But with the digital revolution and the digitalization, now we're delivering on data, information, and actionable information in a timely manner for our patients. So we build these mobile apps. We build these the wearables, for example. We talk about wearables, the smartwatch, being able to indicate that, hey, are you eating something? For a diabetes patient, that's a major thing, so they can start tracking your carbs and stuff like that. Those are the frontier. Now, with the paradigm shift that is happening, used to be in the old days, you had a mobile phone, right? And then the app would just be a calculator. This is how much you should consume and all that. Or utter a repeater of the screen that's on a insulin pump. This is what the pump is saying you're screening. But the paradigm is shifting where the phone itself, the application is becoming a medical device, software as a medical device to provide that therapy, to provide that alert saying, hey, you need a dose insulin in you because you're running low, or those types of alerts. So that being a medical device, now we have to think of, how does it connect to the ecosystem? How does it connect to the pump? How does it connect to the sensor? And more importantly, in Chris's terms, how does it connect to his healthcare providers and give them alerts so they can start treating the patient in a more timely fashion, not the traditional, hey, every 3 months we come in, we get tested, and that's the only time you see your provider. Now you can get IM from your provider saying, hey, your range is kind of off. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. You know what I love about both of you are saying, right? I have older parents, and my dad, has certain things that we frequently visit the hospital for. But the largest challenge I see we're overcoming is his ability to express to a healthcare provider how he feels and how that translates into, whether it's glucose readings or insulin readings, right? That has just become so much simpler, right? Because these devices are able to show the equivalent of, I don't feel so good. And I think patient care itself takes on a new life when technology is bridging that gap. Is I know why you're feeling the way you're feeling because I have some medical information to go with it. And I see that in both when I go to a hospital and obviously coming from the devices you're talking about, Vince.
Yeah, and I think from a healthcare provider standpoint, we represent sometimes that product, the Medtronic product in this case, and the patients look to us, and if we're kind of promoting it or putting it out there, then they're kind of holding us a little bit accountable to say it's okay to do this. And so, I think Vince's team's doing a great job of putting all that together, and we're leveraging that in multiple ways of how we grab that data, pull it in. But I feel like we've got a responsibility to make sure that as we recommend it, we've done some type of vetting of the product too. Of is it safe? Where's the data going? And are we comfortable allowing or encouraging our patients to put their private information in here? So it's kind of a risk as we acquire some of the manufactured product.
Yes, very true. It's more of a shared responsibility. And so we've been talking about that since I became a member of the HISAC in 2016, and it's collaboration. It's mutual trust that we're both doing our part.
Right.
Love it. So obviously, the last 2 years have changed quite a few things in the world, right? We hear supply chain. We just, even in our business, have kind of seen that I think consumers have fundamentally changed how they want to consume stuff, right? They want most services to come to them. We're kind of used to this paradigm where we're less inclined to go out. We want more services at our fingertips. But in your businesses, has anything around mobile changed due to COVID? Has it changed how you guys think about embracing mobile or what it means to your business?
I could jump in first. Sorry, I cut somebody off, but I think the answer for me is no. We were already on this journey prior to that. It's if anything, I guess COVID left us with is a level of urgency or maybe more acceptance to change and how things are done. And but it was already a path, and it really hadn't changed that either on the consumer side or the internal workflow side.
Yeah, from a manufacturing standpoint, the digital transformation has been, I've been talking since I joined a healthcare and started on this R&D journey. It is about how much data is out there and how we can make it useful. And there's a lot of data out there. The key is to capture and make use of it for the patient itself. So COVID was maybe a something that pushed it along a little quicker as far as the sharing of data, the acceptance of the cloud data and stuff like that. Because prior to COVID, I'll be honest, I was working with the cloud, and we were getting a lot of pushback saying, "Oh, we can't do that. We can't push patient health information there. We can't put patient health information on an application and things like that." So I think that's the one thing that COVID did, was it just made the acceptance a little easier. But as far as everything else, we were already on that projectile.
Vince, what would you say was I mean, I know it was during COVID, but what was the underlying reason? Did they feel like this was we had to do cloud to provide the best care for our consumers? What was the underlying reason though? I mean, when COVID happened for that change?
Well, the cloud is more about speed and about being able to push out to peripherals. And you have all the regulations and things like that about data privacy, regions, and all that other stuff. So the cloud could help support having a data center in Europe so you can keep that GPDR and all the health information localized there versus having to build an entire data center on premise. And it allowed for upgrades and allowed for the speed of enhancement. Data centers or on-premise tends to be a little slower. You got to go through the configuration management. The cloud with the SaaS models, you can deliver on those edge use cases much quicker.
Yeah, no, makes sense. No. Obviously, I think, Chris, you touched on this. So I'll throw this back to you, right? I mean, mobile is wonderful, as we all know, right? I now sleep next to my mobile phone, which is concerning. We live some of our lives on mobile, and I think healthcare is becoming the next big thing on mobile. And I say that because, in our world, we look at it as, there are about 18 to 20 apps on my phone that know my payment information.
Right.
And that used to be 5, then it became 10, now 18, right? And I see that evolution on my own phone. And slowly I'm starting to see healthcare the same way. First it was a calorie counter, then it was a fitness app, then a sleep app, then a meditation app, and now Health BCBS and all these apps starting to pop up. And it seems to be going through the same evolution. But you pointed out there is risk, as nice as it is and as convenient as it is as a consumer. So for your organization, what drove you guys to kind of think about mobile security and what it means for a patient?
Yeah, as you sat there and listed off all those apps, I think that sums it up. That's what freaks me out a little bit, right? Is what are all those apps doing on the device? And so for a long time, we've always had a risk assessment and process around applications that go on our own devices, our managed devices, our laptops and desktops and things like that. But the push, the convenience of mobile computing, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone, Android device, it's happened. Why do we treat it different? And that's really what it comes down to, is we have got to secure that device because it's the same data they're accessing conveniently, whether it's our email or patient information through one of our clinical systems. Do we know the posture of that device? Do we know the behavior of the applications we're using? Do we know where our data is going, and is our data safe and secure? And so that's what drives it. We're seeing more zero-day attacks on iOS and Android operating systems than we have in the past. And so it's just a broader attack plane for somebody to get into our organization, steal data, or worse, drop malware. And so it's in our environment in big ways, and we have to control it. I heard a stat the other day that as we look at the devices that we issue out to our employees, so their own children's own devices with iPhones and such, we have over 14,000 different applications that people have loaded on their phones through the app stores. Our security group, we don't have the bandwidth, nor have we gone through and vetted every one of those to make sure that it's behaving appropriately. And so we've got to rely on some intelligence on that device to help us make sure that we're securing that appropriately and we don't have risk out there.
That makes sense. Vince, your thoughts?
Yeah, very true. To elaborate on some of the stuff that Chris was talking about data, security, and all that, for us as well, one added value, one added concern or risk factor is safety. Now, these mobile apps and the therapy data or the therapy delivery itself could be impacted by the security of the mobile device and could impact the safety of the patients themselves. And that's a major concern for us, which is why you have to build in the security into the mobile platform. The other risks or the other things that drive you to mobile app security is the fact that we're building applications now. We're building software as a medical device to be put on a consumer product, a BYOB, bring your own device. So the patient, the customer owns that device. They own the configuration, the operating system, and all that. And our app functions on that. So there's so much dependency on that. Now we must secure that application, but we also have to be able to have safeguards in there. For example, our application needs to say, hey, this doesn't work if it's a jailbroken or rooted phone, because there's a lot of vulnerabilities within that device that does that. So you have to have that security in there. You got to have the transport security in there because you have sensor data that's being pushed to the phone or the cloud. So that data needs to be encrypted. You have to resist that man in the middle attack that can manipulate that data and change the therapy of the patient. And then you have to have the security of the intellectual property, the algorithms that are being run. So you got to obfuscate the code itself, because your code is not controlled. It's hanging off of the Google Store or the Apple Store. It's downloaded. And once it's downloaded, anyone can try to manipulate it or take data out of it or reverse engineer it. So those safeguards need to be in place so we can ensure that our application isn't going to have a side channel attack, another application out there that's going to affect our product.
Yeah, and Vince, touch on two very interesting points. Is when we are talking to enterprises, right? Whether it's healthcare, finance, media is a big one right now with all the streaming craziness going on. We are always having to remind a lot of enterprises that your code is your intellectual property, right? It really does come under copyright law, but we just don't think about it that way, right? We keep thinking, copywriting is the logo, the name, but your code is everything after a point, to your point, right? If you have sensitive algorithms. The other shift that we are seeing a lot just as a mobile security firm is the adoption of consumer devices, and they're replacing specialized hardware, right? And Chris, you mentioned this, right? I think we see this continuing, and it looks like even you're starting to see it a lot more within hospitals, where specialized hardware going away, and now it's app on a tablet or an app on a phone. And we seem to be getting, we've warmed up to that idea that this is the way to go, but let's just recognize the risks of doing that, because it's a consumer device at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah. Now, another part of our education when we talk to enterprises is having to remind a lot of us that there's a lot your phone accesses, right? I think when we think laptops, it's evident that, it's my work laptop and all my work information is in there. But I find myself constantly telling people, your app accesses so much information and also accesses critical systems, right? Do you have an inventory of what all it accesses, right? And that's a powerful conversation when we talk to enterprises. For you guys, what assets are you most concerned about?
Data. Well, data can be very, therapeutic and helpful to the patient, but in the wrong hands, like everything else, it could be dangerous. PHI, they can all the information housed on a mobile device. You get the health records, you get the therapy data, you get all that stuff. But in addition to the traditional things that are being stored, it's the things that the continuous monitoring piece of it, the communication line between the different devices, because now your mobile device could be used as your central hub. It's no longer a repeater of something that's being seen on the device, but it could be the only thing that you see. Like a glucose sensor, it's a little dime-shaped thing. There's no display on that, so the only thing you see is the display on that. So that data communication needs to be protected, as well as the integrity of the data or the sensor data that you can visibly see. So, therapy data and PHI critical for us.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, that's a lot of what our program's built around, is protecting the data of our patients who trust us with it. And whether it's a device that's managing that data or using that data, or if it's on our network and could impact that, ancillarily, it's important to make sure that we're securing that, as well as securing our environment of things that can bring in malware. So if it's a medical device, a lot of times we're limited on what type of security tools we can put on there, or sometimes the OS is something that's not supportable, or even the device maybe is just not strong enough to run a security stack. So how do you isolate? How do you microsegment all of that away, and protect the crown jewels and all and everything of your operations, to make sure that you can sustain clinical care in a safe way? And at the end of the day, the patient's data is secured and safe as well.
Yeah, I've always found this question to really help enterprises. When they say, yes, we want to embrace mobile, we always say, yeah, but do you understand how many types of Android devices there are out there? I mean, just the hardware fragmentation alone is no joke. I mean, it's great that they have 85% of the market, but for the business model to succeed on so many different hardware models, right, it can become overwhelming very quickly.
Right.
So many things to think about.
Krishna, do you mind if I interject with a question from the audience real quick? So they asked, how do hospital clinicians securely message? And I would assume they're looking for possibly, from end-to-end encrypted from one mobile device to another, possibly. What would be the response to that question? So overall, it's how do hospital clinicians securely message?
I think I brought that up early on some of our use cases, and there's a number of different applications in the market that do that. But you're right. For us, it's a secure. We actually have a couple of tools, but there's secure encrypted messages through a platform. For us, it's through our EMR, and we also have a third-party product that has been a good pager replacement strategy for us. I mean, you can page them. You can also message back and forth. That end-to-end's encrypted. Things like iMessage, that's not encrypted. So texting is not allowed in our organization when you're dealing with patient information. So we drive everything to a secure tool.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Another fun topic that's seems to be evolving quite a bit, right? Just from a mobile security perspective, and especially when we talk about data, I mean, you guys know this as much as we do, a lot of regulation, right? And a lot of new regulation. I think initially we saw GDPR, and then we saw GDPR-like, NIAP-like popping up everywhere globally. The promising part of us dealing with a lot of enterprises is we do like that enterprises are really asking the question, right? What am I collecting, right? And I've fielded more collecting conversations now than sharing conversations, which is promising because that's really where this issue starts on mobile. But I mean, we see a ton of regulation across different industries. What regulations make it hard to adopt mobile for you guys? I mean, what comes to mind? Chris, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, Vince is probably gonna have a longer list than I do. And this was kind of an interesting lesson that we've learned along the way. See, we're a Texas-based healthcare provider, and our patients are regionally located for the most part within surrounding states in Texas. But as we were developing for us, as we were starting to develop a branded mobile app and get that out there and provide some consumer-based tools that allow patients to deal with their healthcare, and some of our attorneys started to bring up things like the California data protection laws. And so, what happens when somebody in California downloads our app and starts dealing with their medical information? We weren't built for that. So we had to go through some thought processes there of, it's in the store, so anybody can download it. I can't stop that. But how do I control where it's allowed to be used? And so we've had to go through a lot of legal hurdles there just to be careful with that. GDPR, we don't deal with just a whole lot in our space, but it is a risk out there. But it's I don't know if it makes it hard. It's just to be conscious of what it is, and it goes back to us of protecting the data. HIPAA is the thing we got to be aware of and manage. And you have regulations now like 21st Century Cures that allows everybody and anybody access to their data in real time. And so you see a lot of third-party apps coming up that can connect to our EMR through the FHIR protocols that's required to be available. And not that we can control it, but it's how is that data used? And so that's been part of the education we've had to have with some of our patients of be careful. Read the terms and conditions of what you're agreeing to. So if you download a third-party app from the store that's going to help you manage your healthcare conditions, know how they're going to use the data. Because it's your data. So once you grab it from our system, it's kind of your responsibility. But like we were talking earlier with between Vince and I, it ends up being a shared responsibility because still people look at us as being the protector of their information, even though they took it out of our system and used it some other way.
Yeah. Vince, what do you think?
Yeah, as on a global scale, there's just a lot of regulations in the medical device field itself. So software as a medical device is no different from hardware as a medical device as far as regulations. So since 2014, when the FDA released their pre-market guidance, that was the first one, then they released post-market guidance, there's been 16 global regulations that has been released by other countries: Korea, Singapore, Germany, France. So each one of those have a set of requirements. The good thing is that as a community, and with HISAC being a great leader at it, most of these countries and regulations kind of synchronize because a lot of the same players are expressing it. But each one of them do have their uniqueness, and each one of those uniqueness gives us a user need or security needs or control. And in order to build something, we wouldn't build something just for one country, one state or something. We got to build something globally. So we got to take all of those requirements or needs under consideration when we do our design controls. And then it depends on the application or the platform itself. So is it a health app where it's a calculator or something like that? Or is it something that could deliver therapy? And in that case, it goes through the same regulatory submission process as a regular medical device. So the software itself would need to have design controls. It would have to have security testing, would have to have penetration testing. It would have to have a submission through the FDA. And that's just for the US. And we still have compliance regulations over in Europe, EU MDR, over in Asia, and all those places. So depending on where it's being sold, there are numerous applications, and that's just the medical device regulations. Similar to what Chris has to go through, there are also the privacy regulations that we have to do, and has their own set of rules. And now each state kind of have their own set of rules as well.
Yeah, the question I really have for both of you on this, right? When we look at all these laws, we understand in spirit they're trying to protect data, which is doing the right thing. But as the businesses that you guys are, does it make it difficult to run the business? I understand it's well-intentioned, but some of these things, I don't know, but when we read things, right, some of it seems like compliance for compliance sake, and it doesn't really take into account how some of these technologies work and then might be inherently secure. But how do you guys look at this stuff?
Yeah. So in my past life before here, one of the issues that we brought up, or one of the issues that we had, which kind of relates to your question, is collaboration. So if you had a patient in the US, a doctor in Europe, and another doctor in Asia, how do we collaborate that across territory, across international lines, and how do you build that information pipeline so they can legally share that information or that pre-therapy? You can do it via all these mechanisms like the disclosures and send the data piecewise. But the difficulty when I was looking at this 3-4 years ago was, how do we do it real time? I mean, that's the key. How do we make those agreements internationally?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Vince, because for us, yes, it's hard, and the data going internationally scares us to death, from a risk standpoint of, because HIPAA's we're held to that in the United States, but it's a U.S. law, and it doesn't leave the borders unless we can put teeth into a U.S. company. So that's one thing we start to worry about. And I mean, you bring up a great conversation that we're always discussing internally of when it leaves the shore, what are the requirements, and how do we protect that data and still meet our obligation of you got the federal laws, and then you just listed all the different privacy things out there. Each state's different on how privacy is handled and reported and all that. So it's a challenge.
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine. Vince, I looked at the list of regulation you sent me. Well, it's going to take me a year to read, I think, just trying to get that.
Yeah. And there's two drafts, the FDA pre-market guidance that just came out as a draft, and there's another IDMDF draft that came out. So every time one of those comes out, we got to rethink our security and requirements.
Apart from the regulatory and the ecosystem and the environment stuff, right, we also have seen some organizations, whether it's culturally, technology-wise, right, are in a better position to embrace mobile. Some aren't, just because of where they operate, the industries they operate, and the regulations they have to deal with. Within your specific organizations, what makes it difficult or hard or not as easy as you think it should be to embrace some of this stuff?
Consumer products. For us, consumer, it's BYOD. The patient or the doctor or healthcare provider owns that device. It's built on Android with all the flavors of Android, iOS. So iOS comes out with release number 16 in a couple of weeks. Oh my, now we have to make sure that the software itself has been validated, tested, and works. So you have that validation and testing work stream. And anytime there's a change that you can't control within the platform itself, it's got to be tested and validated.
Yeah.
And any anytime the customer decides to make a configuration change on their mobile device, how does that impact the security of my application?
Yeah, that's I didn't think about that. From for us, it's our users. A lot of resistance, and if it's not a children's own device and it's a personal device that they're connecting to our data with, we've got security requirements still, and the user base is not usually openly accepting of putting our security apps on their devices. So that's a lot of messaging and communication we have to go through on what is it we're looking at, why are we doing this, and but there's more and more intelligence and data that we pull from these devices every day and get better at it. And just as soon as we kind of start to settle down the fears of are we reading their text messages, which we're not, we notice an employee, or we notice a phone logging on from a foreign country that we were unaware of that the employee may have gone to. So for us, if you start seeing an employee, the phone starts pinging from Jamaica and they're accessing our email, that's a concern. So we reach out to the employee, we reach out to their leadership and say, is this okay? Before we just react and shut things off. So now all it does is re-incite fears, right? Of, well, you are looking at what I'm doing. And it's, so it's this balanced communication of, no, we're protecting our data and we have an interest in that. So here are some required things for the convenience of using your personal phone to connect to our systems and our data.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, Chris, is even in the 7 years I've been at Zimperium, and we have seen what security means to enterprises has evolved, right? And now, especially with everyone having an app, right? We want to do everything in an app, right? What enterprises end up asking us for is saying, we want our apps to be intelligent, right? We want them to understand that, hey, maybe it's not a great idea to allow the consumer to do certain things, right? And let him know, and also protect the enterprise at the same time, right? Because of what you just said, if you were to put your app on someone else's phone, it's always like, oh, Big Brother is looking over my shoulder. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that conversation saying, oh, I don't know what you're doing on my $1,500 phone, right? But we do see a big shift to that, is they want the app itself, even if it's just secure messaging for that instance, is to understand what's going on the device, to kind of be risk aware and say, hey, look, if the amount of risk is not under the threshold, then we're not going to let it run, right? Let them, connect to a safer Wi-Fi. Let them go on a different device, something. But we do see a lot of push for that. And it kind of makes sense too, because that way both sides are protected. And in some sense, I guess it's a better way of handling privacy, because it's just your app at that point, but minimal, permissions.
Yeah.
Great points. So we have, Vince, in your space, every time I look at a list of startups or growing technologies, it seems like they're in the thousands, right? With wearables and whatnot coming on, and then hospitals specializations. Chris, what's always interesting to me is every time I now go to whether it's children's or some other hospital website, I see telehealth. It seems to be catching on quite a bit. So we do know there are a lot of enterprises and smaller organizations. I'm sure they're embarking on this journey or are somewhere on this journey, right? What is your advice based on what you guys have lived through to people taking this on, right? Embracing maybe just not mobile, maybe other technologies that you've seen work well for you guys on how to approach security, or what are some maybe a place to start and some fundamental things to keep in mind. Chris, why don't you lead this off?
Okay. I guess really as we embrace more of this, we're looking at different ways of securing that data. I mentioned a little while ago the number of different apps that people put on their phone. And Krishna, you went through a bunch, whether it's a sleep app or something like this, and they're all harmless. People don't really understand the risk of things. And so how do we do better conditional access on the data that goes to the phone? Allow you the convenience you need, secure the data we want, and it's just finding unique and new ways to be less intrusive, to allow people to feel the privacy they need to personally feel on their device, but secure our stuff. When we look at that, when we look at our patient segment, it's the same thing of how do we start to force our user segment to do multi-factor authentication in the apps that they're using from us. So that's been a change that we've had to go through our consumer base. Is you want into our portal, we're gonna do multi-factor, and the same with our referring physician bases that's out there. As we go and network with community hospitals and asking for them to do business with us and send us referrals from your clinic, there are some security things we're going to have to go through. And so for us, it's a lot of education and a lot of awareness of how real the risk is, and then why we're doing these things to secure. I've sat in front of a number of small doctors' offices, single physician practices, explaining why we require multi-factor for them to get into the EMR. And it's been interesting, the argument sometimes of, he thinks, I'm good, I'm clean, I don't have any problems. And, there's a bigger picture, right? So this is not just a you thing. You are in a major group of data, and we all have a responsibility. And so security awareness training, I would say, has been the biggest thing of how we communicate and message the why behind what we do, is key.
Yeah, touching on that, from a development standpoint for all those startups out there, it's more about security by design, have it up front versus at the very tail end, because it's kind of just lead out longer lag times as you try to bolt it on. And cyber hygiene, there are fundamental best practices to follow: access control, data encryption, login alerts, those kind of stuff that will cover a majority of that space, that risk space. So hygiene is very important.
Love it. That was the last question of the panel. Thank you both so much. That was a lot of fun. Can I get a peek into your heads and how your organizations operate and how you guys think about security? So thank you so much for engaging with us. We'll take another next 5 minutes. We just wanted to talk about a couple of the use cases that we're seeing that are rapidly growing. And actually, we touched on some of these during our panel. But before that, just to kind of support some of the things that you folks are saying about BYOD, right? And how far this has come along. We did, it's a survey platform that we have, and we essentially ask, if you work with the healthcare organization, how is patient data being accessed? And you will see 44% hybrid, organization managed and employee owned, right? So there is a mix of personal and managed devices quite a bit in these organizations, and everyone's being forced to think about it as those are two different problems. And, we have to have security that kind of is flexible to those things. Chris, to your point, nobody wants a third-party app on their, on their device, right? They don't trust it. On the app security side, right? Vince, going back to your point, 63%, right, responded securing public cloud data storage is one of their main concerns, right? And this is incredible thinking, we do believe, and we see this in other industries, as we seem to have embraced cloud in a hurry, especially mobile apps. And kudos to technologies out there that have made it easy, but definitely we're seeing industry survey data supporting a lot of the things you folks are talking about. Comes to use cases, we thought we'd just talk briefly about a few of these. And I think the first 2 or 3 are very, we covered them in a conversation. Remote patient monitoring, Vince, as you mentioned, right? We see a lot of literature I've read, around chronic diseases, right? Chronic conditions, and where we see a lot of new companies, new apps popping up around this sector. And if you see, the market sizes of these, they're healthy and growing fast, right? And Chris, this is why I brought up telemedicine, is the ability, to provide services to remote areas and the underserved population. That's huge, right? Considering the healthcare crisis kind of we're going through in this country. Mobile medical apps, more and more, right? Apps that represent EKGs, apps that represent, God knows what else. Monique, I know you've done a lot of reading around hospitals and how they're using it and stuff like that. What do you think about that one? The whole 065 play seems like everyone's kind of embraced it.
Absolutely. We notice a lot, not only in enterprises, but in the healthcare sector as well. Like Chris had mentioned, a lot of the healthcare providers are leveraging these applications to reduce the number of technology and everything on their tool belts in order to make their lives more efficient, be able to securely communicate with other doctors. And not only that, to send like x-rays and lab results in real time. So it's been used, mobile devices have been used to make their lives easier and to communicate a lot faster than they have in the past. Now, with doing that, you do see a lot more BYOD devices in the healthcare space. And on top of that, mobile applications are a huge play on these mobile devices. On average, there's about 80 applications just on one device alone. And, like you're mentioning, I have my gym application, I have my sleep application. I also have my meal application to remind me when to eat and drink water during the day. But you also have to think about what type of information is being transmitted through these applications. And are these applications being hardened in a timely manner? So those are just some things to think about when it comes to use cases in hospitals and healthcare sector overall, because these type of apps and secure communications can lead to ransomware attacks when it comes to, phishing attempts on mobile devices. It is harder to see the link on a mobile device, taking a look at emails, it is a smaller screen. And when it comes to mobile devices, you need something to help protect you from that.
Yeah, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Zach, looks like we have
Yeah, another question came into the queue, and they're stating, does hospitals manage all staff BYOD mobile devices in mobile device management?
I think that answer varies greatly between healthcare providers. I see that debate a lot between CIOs and CISOs on what to do. And for us, we're a mix. It comes down to kind of the risk of what's stored on the device. And so email is the primary thing that can be downloaded and stored on a device. Everything else is delivered through app virtualization. So if you're gonna natively use an iOS mail app to pull our data, then yes, you're gonna be in our MDM. We get greater control when it comes to like the Outlook app. So we get greater control on that through Office 365. So less risk, and we're able to not push the MDM in that case. So I guess it's a depends for us, but it just kind of depends on the situation and how well we feel we can secure what's at rest on that device.
Yeah, and Chris, to echo that, I think we also see a lot of enterprises rethinking the MDM versus MAM, right? Where it makes sense to deploy one versus the other, because it allows them to respect privacy depending on what they have to deal with. So completely agree with what you're saying, folks. The last thing I want to chat on is a lot of things that Vince and Chris are talking about, right? Especially with mobile, what we have seen is you're better equipped to deal with security if you understand where a majority of these risks kind of arise, right? And to just kind of keep things simple, we kind of put this in 3 buckets, right? The first bucket is If you're developing mobile apps, then your development teams and app teams make a ton of decisions, right? You got to decide, is there proprietary code in my app? Am I going to use third-party code? What type of encryption? What compliance mandates, right? So your development teams and app teams are making a lot of decisions, right? And all of these decisions have consequences, right? Some good, some bad. Security is never perfect. So you're going to balance out user experience, value, and security. So always look at these decisions to make sure the risk you're willing to accept is under the threshold of your enterprise, right? The second, especially with mobile apps, Chris, you touched on this, and Vince, I know you mentioned it early on, is unlike all your other apps, we build an app and we put it out there in the public store, and you have no control on who can download it. And we know if you give malicious actors enough time with apps or whatever it is, they will break it open, right? That's just the function of how long it will take them. But you have to be cognizant that people are going to do that, right? The more popular your app is, the more value it delivers. It becomes a bigger target to download, reverse engineer, copy, theft, whatnot. So make sure that even though it's sitting in a store, that the app can be broken into. The third is really where device and app both come into play, is these apps eventually run on end user devices. We have no control what the end user does on his device, right? We just have to deal with it pretty much, right? There's no control on the Wi-Fi he connects to, the malware that he downloads, phishing links, right? Whether knowingly or unknowingly, there's a lot of risk in how that end user uses his phone, right? But the app has to contend with that, right? So make sure you are thinking about how to make your app defend itself, right? Make sure it has the ability to defend itself when it's dealing with all these elements. So again, if you want to talk more about this stuff, feel free to reach out to Monique or I. We're happy to go down this path and help you understand better about these risks. Again, big thank you to our panel for engaging. Chris, Vince, thank you so much. It was a fun conversation. Folks, ton of other topics, ton of other resources out there on the Zimperium website if you're more interested in what we're doing around mobile security, app hardening, and eventually helping you stay safe on mobile, right? So feel free to browse the Zimperium website if you were looking for more information. With that, we've kind of come to the end. Again, Vince, Chris, thank you so much for hanging out. Loved the conversation. And hopefully we can do another one on regulation or something which is interesting. Thank you so much, folks.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.